Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Father Show, and I'm so glad you joined us today. Anger in men is a real problem that most of us experience, whether it is because of a hurt, a shame, inadequacy, or a loss. Do we know why we're getting angry? How do we recognize or take steps to correct the problem? Today on the Father Show, we're going to talk about that with our guests, so stay tuned. Welcome, everyone, and to thank you for joining us today. And today we have a fantastic guest, and I brought this guest all the way over from the UK. Him and I got into a discussion, and we were talking about the similarities that we here in America experience, and also in the UK they experience the same thing when it comes down to fatherlessness and men and our anger. So I want you to welcome, please, let's welcome Gary Napier. Gary, did I? How you doing?
Hi, Mark. I'm well, thank you.
Good. Did I
Yourself?
say your last name correctly?
Not quite, but I'm used to that throughout my life. Especially in doctor's surgeries, they never get it right.
Yeah, it's
But it's
what?
it's
Napier.
Napier.
Napier. Okay. I'm
Napier.
sorry, man.
Yeah,
I'm gonna get
that's
it.
fine.
I won't get it. So how you doing today?
Yeah, doing really well, thank you. Yeah, it's a
Good.
privilege to be on your show. Thank
Good.
you.
Well, I want you to tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so yeah, my name's Gary Napier. I've lived most of my life in the UK, south of London, and I'm married. It's over 20 years. I can't remember the exact number. I'll give you a shot for that. And to my wife named Sarah. And we've got three beautiful girls. Our eldest is 20, Mia. And we've got twin girls, age 14, Caris and Kira.
Man, twin girls.
Twin girls, all girls. Yeah, so we've got a house
Oh,
of women. We do have two dogs, and they're male. Golden Retriever and a German Shepherd.
oh, that's one of my favorites.
Yeah, the German Shepherd.
Yeah, that's one of my
Yeah.
favorite. That and uh, Akitas.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Now, how is it having a house full of women? And today we're gonna be talking about men and anger. So I know if you got, is your wife not close, is she?
She can hear me, she can't hear you.
All right, but I'm not gonna get you into trouble today. But I know with a house full of women,
Yeah.
and being virtually the only male in a house,
Yeah.
I know anger is something that you're going to have to deal with. And not because, your wife is a bad wife or anything like that. I know raising daughters, because I have two. Raising
Okay, right.
daughters
Yeah.
is going to be some anger involved in that. So how do you cope? With a house full of women, twin girls, how do you cope with all that?
In truth, Mike, they give me an easy time. Yes, you have your moments, and I think now the whole household, without being too technical, are of a say woman stage. So that time of the month, you do try to tread carefully because going from one to four is like okay. I put myself in a hotel for 1 week out of every month throughout the year. But I would say, in reality, they football's my outlet, and they allow me that space. But more recently, over the last 5 to 7 years, I would say I've recognised the importance of the dad with daughters, which may sound strange, but sometimes you see the natural correlation between a father and a son,
Right.
and probably in parallel, the mother and a daughter, especially with my eldest daughter, because she taught me how to be a parent for most part before the twins came along.
Hmm.
I've now come to recognise the importance of the role a father plays, and consequently, if the dad's not showing up correctly, the anger that they can start feeding to their children.
Yeah. And I agree, the women are going to help in, and I know we talk a lot about, you know, men and fathers, or excuse me, fathers and sons. And
Yeah,
there's a lot of discussion about that. But we as men have to understand that the father and daughter relationship is just as important as a father and son, because in my estimation, I know I can teach my son certain things that he's just going to be able to learn from me because his
yeah,
mom can't teach him, how to be a man. But at the
yeah,
same time, I'm also teaching my daughter because a mother is not going to be able to teach her daughter what she can expect from a man and how a man is supposed to act.
yeah,
You as a father
precisely.
are just the number one example for that. So it's, I tell everyone it takes both parents, a male and a female. And even though you have, gay parents and so forth, so I'm not knocking them, but
Yeah,
you still have to have a male. And just because you got a daughter doesn't mean you can relax. Because I think a daughter, for a father, a daughter is something that we're going to protect even more than our son.
yeah,
The mother is going to protect the son because she know
yeah.
what women are about. We
Very
as
true.
men, we're going to protect our daughters because we know what men is about.
Yeah, it's reality.
Right. So I agree. We definitely have to look at the father daughter relationship and pay close attention to it just as much so as we do the father and son.
Yeah, agree
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So now with me with anger, would you say I know in my intro I was talking about anger is sometimes manifest because of failure and inadequacies and stress and things of that
Yeah.
nature. Do you find that to be the same, or and more so?
Yes, very much so. Typically, we say within a work environment and even a household, I find that a lot of people, the difference, anger is often born from frustration. And I would characterize frustration as something that we know is in our capabilities, but we're not achieving it. And that's why we're frustrated because it's within us to be able to accomplish whatever goal we've set before us. Whereas anger is often manifested when we feel that we've lost that control and we don't know how to regain that control. And so, for example, if a guy is feel that he's losing his children through a divorce or a separation, and he's having to fight access the control that he once had, and it seems like it's now being taken away. That can manifest itself into anger through the frustration, and then ultimately anger. And you see that in the work context as well, where guys are struggling at work or they feel it's out of their capabilities. And rather than acknowledge the frustration and try and do something about it, because we put on this mask that we're in control, the very opposite, ironically, is happening inside. We're actually losing control. And then once again, the symptom that everybody sees is the anger. So I would say often losing control or not feeling in control, because it's naturally it's about perception as well,
Hmm.
that gives birth to anger.
Now, do you find that anger is also a symptom of depression?
Yes, I would say that anger, it, anger can raise its head from many different avenues, and depression, as you said, Mike, is clearly one of them, although it shows itself in a different way, because often when people are depressed, they become more inward, although deep down it's anger. I would go even further and say that through my experience as a counsellor, that often the root of anger is rejection. And normally whoever I counsel, more times than not, it goes back to the parent or parents, and there's some feeling of rejection there. And due to that rejection, perceived or real, it's real to them. Anger then gives birth, and they can just see how their behaviour as a child and later on as an adolescent and as an adult, that anger just keeps showing itself in different forms. But the root is rejection.
So with rejection, what are some ways that anger can manifest, or the problem? What kind of rejections are, can really bring up a lot of anger in a child? Period.
I would say the most common rejection is a parent's leaving. So the absent parent, and often it's the father, although it's not always the case. And there's anger in terms of, you've left me. So see that the relationship's broken up, you've abandoned me, I'm your son or I'm your daughter. And even if there's still a loving home with the parent that's left, and if they have another partner, subconsciously it's that feeling that you've left me. And in an ideal world, we grow up with biological mother and father. That's life is much more complex than that. However, in terms of our DNA, what we expect, when that's taken away from us, there is a form of rejection. And I would even say, going further back, Mike, often whereby a child is not expected or wasn't planned, in inverted commas, even from the womb, that child can sense that rejection. Even before it's birthed into this world.
Right. Because they can feel that coming. I mean, even when they in the mother's stomach, they can feel what she's feeling.
Yes.
And so, if she's feeling anxiety because of maybe the way the dad is acting and his anger that he's putting out, that baby can feel that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, very much so. They, you still communicate, although they're not here. They're depending upon the senses and what they're receiving. And if the mother is anxious, or the mother doesn't want the child, and or there's anxiety between the mother and the father, it's natural the child will pick that up, and that would be what they're coming into the world with.
Now, I was reading in your bio, and I know your father left when you were young, about 7. And and that produced a lot of anger in you, and it really, when I was reading that, really made me think, because I know in my early teens I had a lot of anger, and I couldn't and didn't recognize why. And now reading what you wrote in your bio, my dad died when I was 13.
Right.
And I'm now thinking that was probably a lot of my anger, So, can you tell the audience a little bit about what you experienced, what the age of 7.5?
Yeah, sure. Prior to that, it was a relatively, I wouldn't say a normal childhood, but my mum and dad I was living with, although I did witness too many times domestic violence and abuse. Although the abuse was never directed towards me, I was sheltered from that, because I was like the proud son to have. But my mum did experience that. And then at the age of 6, I think it was, I then witnessed directly my dad, my late father, attempted to kill my mum through stabbing her. So I saw that. And yet, Mike, despite seeing that right in front of me, I never felt or displayed any anger towards my dad. Even when he was then arrested and subsequently went to prison, I still used to go with my granddad to visit him. I loved him. He was always my hero, my idol. And So for me, it wasn't an automatic anger. I hate you, which some children would have responded by. I loved my mum. My mum was my pedestal. Yet my dad was still my hero. Not the hero for doing that, but I did see the
Right.
fault in him. And I was
Yeah.
like, I love you, Dad. You're my dad. So when it really started appearing to me, it was a problem. Probably other people noticed it, but not me, because I had an independent spirit, especially with my dad being removed from the home. I then took on that status, and my mum lent on me, so I was doing things that a child at 6, 7 wouldn't be doing in terms of coming home from school, letting himself in. I had a younger brother looking after him, so I just assumed a lot more responsibility at an early age, and that made me grow up and become more mature. So I felt, grown up. But then looking back, I realised that when my mum used to leave me with childminders or nannies, it was often short-lived because I would end up having a fight with one of their children or their child. So the anger was being displayed without me being conscious of it. And I guess football for me, soccer for you guys in the US,
Okay.
was my channel of energy. That's where my anger was released without realising it was anger. So I was always very competitive, and that just gave me a vehicle to release whatever frustration was happening inside of me. So it was kind of camouflage, and it was a safe space where I could do that. I was relatively good at football. I was passionate, so it was used as something positive, all this energy going out. And it wasn't until I sought therapy much later on as an adult that I then began to realise I was an angry child. And I look back and I see some of the episodes I had with teachers. There was a very short fuse. I didn't really know how to handle relationships. And looking back, I think, I gave my mum and my family at times a really hard time.
Yeah. And I know, looking back at my youth, and it took me years to mellow myself down for the anger that I had, and really not knowing. I just thought it was my personality. But how
Yeah.
did you overcome? I know you say you went to counseling. What were some of the steps that they gave you to help you identify it, number one, and then overcome it?
I think prior to counselling, I must have been married then, say 12, 13 years, not sure the exact number. And as an adult, I remember looking in the mirror, and I was upset this time. And I saw myself, and I saw my dad. And I thought, gosh, I know I look angry, and I know I can look angry. So there must have been some awareness, because I also knew I could use that to intimidate people. And so I was a person growing up, and as an adult, that if an issue was going on, I'd probably be the last person you would tell, because I'm going to respond. So I knew I used to be able to use that intimidation with my wife, with close family members and people out there. So although in terms of stature I wasn't the biggest guy, I knew that the anger inside and how that could appear in my face, that I could intimidate people and I could warn people off. So there was an awareness, I would say, through my teenage years, and definitely as a young adult and growing further from there. So by the time I attended therapy, it wasn't for anger. I wasn't even sure why I was attending therapy. I just knew I had to go. So the first few sessions, I was very almost non-engaging, because I just kept thinking, why am I here? I don't want to be here, but I know I need to be here. And I can't remember, but something just broke between us, and that's when I started becoming more vulnerable. And in terms of the steps that the question was asked that you asked, in terms of the first thing, Mike, was owning it, was owning the fact that, yes, I am an angry person. I do struggle with anger, and this has been played a dominant role in my life. And it was hence the man in the mirror. That was one of the man in the mirror significant points in my life, with recognizing I am an angry person. I'm not that I can display anger. I am an angry person. I am an angry man. I am an angry black man.
Yeah, that's something to recognize, and I applaud you for recognizing and taking the steps, because I know a lot of men, we don't like going to counseling. We don't even believe in
Yeah.
counseling.
Yeah.
So I applaud you for taking that step and initiating, that counseling. And I know reading your bio, you thought that you getting married was going to make you happy, or having a kids was going to make you happy. Um, and I know it did. I know marrying your wife, made you a happy man, and having those three beautiful daughters, I know makes you happy. But that doesn't negate all the anger that you feel inside. That's just another piece of you, that yes, I'm happy about that, but I'm still so angry. Did you do you find that since you're a counselor, do you find that a lot of men uh, find sports or working out as a good outlet to let go of that anger?
Yes, and it's good that there is some outlet. Is it a permanent fix? No.
Yeah.
And you say like that, with being married and three daughters, that I would have been happy, but deep down in reflection, I wasn't happy.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was even at work, I always used to go for promotion. It'd be the next goal, football. I'd have to be player of the year. I'd have to get that award. And whatever award I went for, most of the time I did achieve, but the satisfaction was short lived. And I think when you've really got anger as part of your core DNA, it's almost impossible to be happy because the two can't coincide together. They can't coexist.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't believe I really experienced happiness. I ticked all the boxes, and on the CV, I looked like a happy person. But deep inside, it was just like, why am I not feeling fulfilled? So, in answer to your question, with regards to men, yes, and in counselling, they're normally very high achievers, some of them, and successful people,
Mm-hmm.
and they feel that they can just replace it by those achievements. But deep down, actually, it fuels the anger even more, because when it's not being satisfied and you're going for that, it becomes an addiction, and it's addiction that it becomes anger and it becomes rage until
Yeah.
you explode yourself, until you give in and you say, right, I'm done. This is not the answer. I've got to face it.
And do you find that men that unfortunately abuse their wife, do you find that this is part of the reason that they have that built up anger and they don't know how to control it?
Unfortunately, yes. Going back to my dad and what I witnessed during my early childhood, in terms of how he treated women, and even though I was disgusted and it hurt me the way he treated my mum,
Mm-hmm.
I never physically abused my wife, but verbally and emotionally, yes. And there was that anger that was forming out, which I didn't really realise, although now it's so obvious, was directed at my dad. But because my dad was around, and because it was very obvious to me it was about my dad, everybody else got it. So people close to me would receive the backlash of my anger. And then you start finding that people don't want to be around you. And it was like this Jekyll and Hyde, because in one sense I was really popular, I was a life and soul of the party, gregarious. But when I switched, it was like a completely different side. And it'd be like,
Mm-hmm.
who is this person? And I remember Mike seeing this photo of me on the football pitch. And this was like in my 30s. And I looked at it and I thought, who is that person? And I just saw this person who just had anger in his face. And no doubt it was about the game and I wanted to win. But for me, I was scared of that person. And I thought, this is the face that I show to people when I'm angry. Because often you can't see yourself, can you? So you just think, I'm okay. But that face was like, and I knew then that was one of the early stages. I've got to do something about this.
Yeah. Now, what are some steps that men can take to overcome this anger? Are there any guidelines or any steps that you can advise men to take?
Yeah, so the first step mentioned before is owning it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like acknowledging that it's like when you've got a pain, you can only ignore it for so long that after a while you do say, okay, I need
Mm-hmm.
to go to the doctors about this. And the second step is, I'll wait for that.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. So the first part is owning it, And the second step is sharing it. So sharing it with somebody you feel comfortable with, who you can be vulnerable. And that's normally somebody who you feel that's not going to judge you, it's not going to make you feel any worse because you're feeling bad in yourself, that accepting I am an angry person. And then the third part, Mike, is choosing to do something about it. And that may be often seeking professional help as a counsellor, a therapist. I know so many men, Mike, who do the first two, admit they've got an anger issue, may have been brought onto them by their spouse or somebody else. They make that contact and then they stop.
Yeah.
And they don't go through that third phase in terms of it's the commitment. I'm committed now to do something about it. And it's frustrating, as well as I can feel their pain. I do empathise, but they'll own it and they'll say, right, I do need to do something about it. They've shared it with their wife or whoever. They sometimes make that call and then you don't hear, and it's like, I can't go through with this. So there's still that barrier. So they don't actually commit to the work that needs to be done to be free from that anger.
Do you think that's part of a false masculinity hood, the reason why they're not going to get go through the whole process and get the help that they need?
Yeah, I think on the face of it, it's the ego, it's the pride, and like, no, I don't really need this. I think deep down, and I'll say even most men are aware of this, it's fear. And it's fear of, right, having to face this, having to own it, and having to do something about it. And it's taking the easy option. I'd rather just ignore it. Or they'll convince themselves and rationalise, I'm actually okay. I'm not that angry because I haven't beaten anyone up, or I'm not physical with my wife. It's that. And I'll go back to that word with men, responsibility. And often as men, we don't take the right responsibility. We know it, but we choose not to.
Yeah. And that's the wrong, and it shouldn't get to a point where your anger makes you lose a job or make you lose your spouse, or the worst case, end up in prison because you done hurt your spouse or killed your spouse or killed somebody else for road rage or whatever. So you got to be able to take that responsibility and take control. Now, I know sometimes, it's a generational thing, like you mentioned you saw your dad, and generally I'm guessing maybe he saw his dad doing the same thing. And we got to break that cycle. But let me ask you, did your dad come from an abusive family as well?
Not at all, but there is a story, because my granddad was complete in terms of nature, and I used to question, like, my granddad was like my father to me. Like, how's my dad the way he is? Because you're just completely different. You don't display any aggression. You're just gentle. And he told me that back in Jamaica, 'cause that's where they're from, he was the model boy. Everybody asking, your dad is this, your dad's that. And the turning point for my dad was his mum dying. I say his mum because I didn't know else. It's before I was born. His mum died when he was 11 or 12 years of age. And he was a mummy's boy. He adored his mum. And I then remember speaking to my dad about it and saying, can you share more? And he said he was told not to grieve. And he was seen crying one day, and his uncle said, don't cry, you'll go mad. So from that day, he just stopped crying. And whilst it's not an excuse for how he channeled his behaviour as an adult, it definitely had an effect on him, because he didn't fully grieve. He didn't speak about it, so there was no release. He idolised his mum. So there was this, what started off as grief and sorrow, then developed into anger. And that anger I then saw play out against women. And I just think subconsciously, because it was an anger of my mum being taken away from me. Back then, there was no such thing as going for counselling, as you said earlier. And you're not talking about it, and you're just supposed to get on as if life is normal. And that definitely then naturally was fulfilled or played out in other areas of his life, but particularly his relationship with women.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. Yeah, that do make sense. And I'm telling you, this has been a good counseling session for me. because it's actually opened up my eyes in regards to why I was so angry when I was a kid, and I
Yeah.
literally had to overcome that. And I didn't do any counseling; I just did it on my own. But
Yeah.
it was just, but like you said, one thing is recognizing it, and that's what
Yeah.
I did. I recognized that I had that anger, and I had to learn how to control it. So I did. But unfortunately, I could go on for hours, but that's our time for the day. But before we
Yeah.
go, I would like for you to be able to tell our audience how they can get a hold of you, and if they want to talk with you, how they can do that as well.
Yeah, sure. So my website address is the Gap Enterprises, www.thegapenterprises.com. Also got a Facebook page, the Gap Enterprises. If you search on Gary Napier or the Gap Enterprises, you should be able to find me fairly easily. And also, I'm happy to give my telephone number. It's 0044 7917 819 375, and feel free to WhatsApp me.
Okay. And, people have to understand too, you're in the UK. So if you're here in the
Yeah,
United States, don't just be calling Gary thinking, oh, he's up, he's awake. And there's a 6 hour difference, folks.
yeah,
So, folks in the UK, okay, call them. But here in the United States, you might be best to set up an appointment to
yeah.
get to talk to Gary because, you know,
And I
we
forgot to
had.
give you the email address, Mike. Sorry. So my
Okay,
email
no, go ahead.
address is gnapier at thegapenterprises.com. So that's gnapier, all one word, at thegapenterprises.com.
Okay, and we'll have that information on the bottom of the screen as well, so people can find you. So
Great.
we'll make sure that they get all that information, and that way they can get in touch with you because think it's so important that men get the help to deal with this anger that you may feel because you've experienced it, I've experienced it, and I know a lot of men that have gone through these anger issues and had to learn how to control it. Some didn't, and
Yeah,
unfortunately, I know the prison is full of men in
yeah,
there that didn't know how to control their anger, and that's why they ended up where they are. So,
yeah.
Gary, thank you so much for being on the show. Don't go away. We'll talk here in a second, but I'm going to close this thing out.
Okay.
But, ladies and gentlemen, that is our show for today. I want to thank you so much for joining us. We've had a great time with Gary, but I want to tell you, if you are struggling with anger issues or you need to really talk to somebody about that, please go to the Father Show with Mike Thompson.com. Click on resources and find some counselor there that can help you in the state that you're in. So, because we want you to get the help that you need. And if you can recognize the problem that you have and you want to solve it and get rid of it, go to the website and find that information so that you can get the help you need. But I want to tell you, thank you for joining us. If you like what you saw on here, click on our YouTube page and subscribe to our page so that you can always catch every episode that we do. And, you won't never miss an episode. So you can click on that notification button and always get all the information that you need. But watching this episode and our others, you can check it out on our YouTube channel. And we're also listed on our Facebook page and on our LinkedIn page. And you can now catch all the audio on iHeart Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Twitter, Amazon Music, Audible, and others. So thank you once again for joining us today. And I wish you all the best. And until the next time, God bless.